The late afternoon sun, a fiery orb sinking toward the horizon, cast long, distorted shadows that danced like specters across the cracked asphalt. My running shoes, once pristine white, were now scuffed and dusty, mirroring the exhaustion that was beginning to set in. As a seasoned cross-country and track runner in my junior year of high school, I thrived on the solitude of long runs, the rhythmic thud of my feet a meditative mantra. It was a peculiar kind of freedom, a liberation found in pushing past physical limits. I wasn't the fastest, not by a long shot, but my endurance was my superpower, allowing me to lose myself in the simple, repetitive act of running, a form of active meditation. The air, typically still and heavy in the encroaching dusk, felt charged with an almost imperceptible hum, a subtle shift in the atmosphere that pricked at the edges of my subconscious. My current gig was a unique blend of passion and practicality. Exercising Izzy, a hyperactive puppy belonging to a woman in a quiet rural neighborhood bordering a dense forest preserve. $10 a run. Easy money, or so I thought. The area itself was a mosaic of scattered, aging houses, forlorn abandoned farms with their skeletal barns, a forgotten cemetery with crumbling headstones, and the unsettling remnants of a disbanded cult commune, its history whispering through the overgrown fields. My parents, ever the cautious guardians, had issued countless warnings about the dangers of running alone in isolated areas. "You never know who's out there, honey," my mom would say, her voice laced with concern. But I, in my youthful arrogance, always dismissed their fears. I was fast, I reasoned, fast enough to outrun any perceived threat. A naive conviction, as I would soon discover. The world, it seemed, had a way of humbling even the most self-assured. This particular evening, just as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in fiery oranges and deep purples, I took Izzy out for a longer route, a deviation from our usual path. The vibrant hues of the setting sun struggled to penetrate the thick canopy of trees, their branches interlacing overhead, creating a tunnel of encroaching twilight. Shadows stretched, elongated and menacing, across the narrow, winding road, making everything feel infinitely darker than it should have been. The air grew heavy, almost suffocating, as if the very atmosphere was holding its breath. The only sounds were the ragged rhythm of my own breathing, the soft, contented panting of Izzy trotting beside me, and the steady, monotonous thud of my running shoes against the uneven pavement. Occasionally, a restless bird would flit through the skeletal branches of the trees, or a distant dog would offer a solitary bark, its sound swallowed almost immediately by the oppressive quiet. Otherwise, the silence was absolute, a profound, eerie hush that settled over the landscape, amplifying every subtle rustle and whisper of the wind. The farther we ventured, the more profound the silence became, as if the world was slowly, deliberately emptying itself of sound, leaving only the profound stillness to echo in my ears. It was a silence that wasn't peaceful, but rather pregnant with an unseen presence, a heavy, watchful quiet that prickled the skin. About 2 miles into our run, we reached a stretch of road that felt particularly desolate, flanked on both sides by a wall of thick, ancient forest, its dense foliage creating an impenetrable barrier. It was here, in this suffocating quiet, that Izzy suddenly halted. Her ears, usually flopping playfully, perked up, rigid and alert, twitching almost imperceptibly as she stared intently into the shadowed depths of the woods. Her entire body became a statue, completely still, every muscle tensed, as if she had sensed something I couldn't yet perceive. A low, guttural whimper, barely audible, escaped her throat, a sound of profound unease that sent a shiver down my spine. My gaze, initially drawn to Izzy's sudden stillness, followed the direction of her unwavering stare. At first, there was nothing but the impenetrable wall of dense trees, their branches, gnarled and ancient, swaying ever so slightly in a barely there breeze. The shadows, already long and distorted, seemed to deepen within the forest's embrace, transforming familiar shapes into unsettling silhouettes. I squinted, straining my eyes against the fading light, trying to discern what had so clearly captured Izzy's attention, what had sparked that primal whimper. And then, between two particularly thick trunks, partially obscured by hanging vines and low-lying brush, I saw it. A man's face. It seemed to materialize out of the shadows, a pale, unblinking presence. He was relatively short, perhaps in his late 30s, though the receding light made it difficult to gauge accurately. A dark hat, pulled low over his brow, obscured much of his face, casting his features into further shadow. Despite the mild, almost balmy evening air, he was wearing a thick, almost bulky jacket, its dark fabric blending seamlessly with the encroaching gloom of the forest. Gloved hands, incongruous in their thickness, rested at his sides, barely visible against his dark clothing. His eyes, however, were impossible to miss. They were locked on me, unblinking, unreadable, an unnerving gaze that felt less like observation and more like a predatory study. His stillness, a profound, unnatural immobility, was what truly unnerved me. It wasn't the stance of someone resting or casually observing. It was the eerie stillness of something waiting, something coiled and ready. A cold, creeping dread began to unfurl in my stomach. I tried to rationalize it, to tell myself he was probably just a hiker, perhaps a lost hunter, though the absence of any visible hunting gear or a backpack felt inherently wrong. Still, something about the way he stood, half hidden in the shadows, watching silently, sent a profound chill down my spine, a sensation that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. His presence felt fundamentally off, like a discordant note in the quiet symphony of the woods. He wasn't just some guy passing through. He was something wrong, something that shouldn't have been there at all, a stark anomaly in the otherwise serene landscape. A primal instinct, a deep-seated warning, screamed at me to turn and run, to flee this unsettling presence. But I fought against it, forcing a polite nod, a gesture of casual acknowledgement, attempting to appear unfazed, unbothered, as if seeing a motionless man staring from the woods was an everyday occurrence. I began to jog again, forcing a semblance of normalcy into my stride, but my heart was already hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat that had nothing to do with the physical exertion of the run. Each thud of my shoes on the pavement felt amplified, the sound almost deafening in the sudden quiet that followed. A few agonizing steps later, Izzy stopped again. This time, her body was rigid, her tail tucked so far between her legs that it was practically pressed against her belly. Her ears were flattened, her entire posture radiating an undeniable fear, a primal terror that mirrored the burgeoning dread within me. My stomach dropped, a sudden, sickening lurch as I slowly, reluctantly turned back. The man had moved. He was no longer lurking behind the tree, partially hidden by the foliage. He was standing right at the tree line, just feet from the edge of the road, fully exposed, still staring. His head was tilted slightly now, an almost imperceptible angle that made him seem to be studying me, analyzing me, as if I were a specimen under a microscope. The sickening realization, cold and undeniable, crept through my veins. He wanted me to know he had moved. He wanted me to notice his closer proximity, to acknowledge his deliberate shift. It was a calculated move, a subtle but deeply unsettling assertion of presence. A cold, metallic slip down my spine intensified, the hairs on my arms prickling as if charged with static electricity. My body, without conscious thought, was instinctively preparing to run, every muscle tensing, every nerve screaming for flight. But I forced myself to stay calm, to project an aura of nonchalance, to pretend I was merely a runner taking a momentary break. Maybe he's just some weirdo trying to mess with me, I silently rationalized, a desperate attempt to quell the rising panic. Maybe if I ignore him, he'll get bored and leave. It was a flimsy hope, a thin veneer of logic over a surging tide of fear. I kept running, maintaining my composure with a struggle, my gaze fixed straight ahead, but my peripheral vision was on high alert. Every few steps, I risked a quick glance over my shoulder, a furtive check to confirm his presence. At first I thought he was gone. The woods, when I looked back, appeared empty again, the shadows seemingly having swallowed him whole. A momentary wave of relief, fleeting and fragile, washed over me. Perhaps my rationalization had been correct. Perhaps he had simply lost interest. But then, just as I turned my head forward, focusing on the road ahead, I caught a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision, a shadow detaching itself from the deeper gloom of the forest. My breath hitched in my throat. I spun back, my heart leaping into my mouth, and what I saw froze me to the core. He was sprinting. Not a casual jog, not a leisurely walk, but a full, terrifying sprint directly toward me. And in his hand, glinting ominously in the last fading rays of sunlight, was a butcher's cleaver, its sharp edge reflecting the dying light with a malevolent gleam. A choked scream, raw and desperate, got caught in my throat, a silent, guttural protest that refused to escape my lips. Pure, unfiltered terror, cold and visceral, exploded through my body, a tidal wave of adrenaline that erased all thought, all conscious decision. I didn't think, I just ran. Adrenaline shot through me like a potent electric current, igniting every nerve ending, every muscle fiber. I pushed myself harder than I ever had in any race, my legs churning, my arms pumping, a frantic blur of motion. My breath came in ragged, tearing gasps, each inhale a painful struggle, each exhale a desperate plea for more air. Izzy, bless her terrified heart, struggled to keep up, her leash jerking violently in my white-knuckled grip as we tore down the deserted road, a frantic, desperate escape. I had never known fear like this before, a primal, bone-deep terror that permeated every fiber of my being. It was a kind of fear that existed deep in the bones, a cold, ancient knowing that whispered of imminent danger, a kind that screamed with absolute certainty, "You're going to die if you slow down." My vision blurred at the edges, the world narrowing to a frantic tunnel of motion. I glanced back only once, a fleeting, desperate check. He was still chasing, a relentless, horrifying figure, his face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage, his mouth slightly agape as if he were growling, a low, animalistic sound that I couldn't quite hear over the pounding of my own blood in my ears. The gleam of the cleaver, that terrible, wicked gleam, caught the last dying rays of sunlight, a horrifying beacon of impending doom. He wasn't just running. His movements were disturbingly erratic, almost spasmodic. His arms flailed wildly, unnaturally, like a puppet whose strings were being yanked by an unseen, malevolent force. His legs, too, moved with an almost unsettling speed, a frantic, jerky gait that seemed too fast, too irregular, as if he were something that wasn't accustomed to the mechanics of running at all, something that had learned to mimic the act but hadn't mastered its natural flow. It was in that moment, amidst the chaos of my own terror, that a horrifying realization struck me, a detail that solidified the unnaturalness of the situation. He wasn't breathing. I could hear my own frantic gasps, the raw, tearing sound of air being desperately sucked into my burning lungs. I could hear Izzy's desperate, ragged panting, the strained sound of her small body pushing its limits. I could even hear the distant, almost imperceptible rustling of the trees, a faint whisper carried on the wind. But from him, from the relentless figure thundering behind me, there was no sound of breath. No inhale, no exhale, just that awful, profound silence beneath the deafening pound of his boots against the pavement. It was a silence that was more terrifying than any scream, a chilling void that spoke of something beyond human. His footsteps, heavy and unyielding, thundered behind me, each impact vibrating through the ground, a relentless pursuit. His pace, impossibly, matched mine, stride for agonizing stride, as if he were connected to me by an invisible, terrifying tether. I reached the periphery of a sprawling neighborhood, its houses appearing as blessed beacons of light in the deepening twilight. With a desperate burst of adrenaline, I veered off the main road, sprinting between the houses, zigzagging frantically through manicured yards, hoping to lose him in the labyrinthine suburban landscape. My vision was blurring at the edges, the world spinning in a dizzying kaleidoscope of motion and fear. My legs screamed in protest, each muscle fiber burning with an excruciating agony, but I couldn't stop. The thought of stopping, of collapsing, was an unimaginable horror. I darted behind a large, dilapidated shed, its rough wooden walls offering a flimsy promise of concealment, pulling Izzy, still panting frantically, with me. Finally, when I was sure, absolutely certain, that we had put enough distance, enough twisting turns between us and him, I pressed myself against the rough, splintered wooden wall, my chest heaving, my hands gripping my knees, gasping for breath, the air burning in my throat. Silence. It was an echoing, hollow silence, broken only by the frantic hammering of my own heart, a drumbeat so loud it seemed to vibrate through my very bones. I swallowed hard, the effort almost painful, my throat raw and constricted. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, I turned my head, my eyes scanning the landscape, searching for any sign of him. At the top of the hill, where the road crested before descending into the heart of the neighborhood, he stood. A solitary, terrifying silhouette against the last vestiges of the twilight sky. The cleaver, no longer glinting with malevolent light, dangled loosely from his hand, a dark, heavy extension of his arm. His chest, impossibly, was rising and falling, a slow, deliberate movement, as if he too had just stopped running, as if he were merely catching his breath after a strenuous workout. But he wasn't chasing anymore. He was just standing there watching, still staring. We locked eyes across the darkening expanse, a chilling, silent communication. His face, once contorted in rage, now held no emotion, no discernible expression. Just that blank, unsettling gaze, an empty void that offered no clue to his intentions. It was as if he had simply lost interest, as if the chase had been a momentary amusement, now discarded. A minute passed, stretching into an eternity, then another, the air thick with unspoken dread. The only sound was the distant, almost imperceptible hum of the suburban landscape slowly coming alive as night descended, a stark contrast to the terrifying silence that enveloped me. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm me, a car's headlights appeared in the distance, cutting through the encroaching dark like twin beams of hope. The white, piercing light swept across the top of the hill, momentarily illuminating the figure. And just like that, without hesitation, without any discernible hurry, he turned. He walked back into the woods, his movements fluid and unhurried, as if simply strolling through a park. No backward glance, no lingering stare, just a complete, seamless disappearance into the thick shadows of the forest. He was gone. I didn't move for a long time, my body still trembling, my mind struggling to process the impossible, the horrifying reality of what had just transpired. When I finally found the strength to move, my legs felt like lead, my muscles stiff and uncooperative. I took the longest route back to the woman's house, a circuitous path that kept me hidden from the main road, sneaking through backyards, clinging to the shadows, avoiding any open spaces where I might be seen. My hand shook uncontrollably as I accepted my payment, forcing a weak smile, acting as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened, as if I hadn't just faced something truly monstrous. I didn't tell her. I didn't tell my parents. The words, even if I could have formed them, would have sounded insane, an unbelievable tale of a man with a cleaver and an unnatural silence. And I knew with absolute certainty that if I had revealed the truth, they would never let me run alone again. The thought of losing that freedom, that solitude, was almost as terrifying as the encounter itself. To this day, I don't know who he was. Was he part of the old cult, a reclusive drifter, or something else entirely, something far more sinister and incomprehensible? The questions linger, a haunting echo in the quiet corners of my mind. But I do know one thing, one undeniable, chilling truth: I never ran in that direction again. The memory of that night, the cold silence, the unblinking gaze, the glint of the cleaver, it forever altered my perception of the world, transforming the familiar into the unsettling, the safe into the perilous. This is a story that spans nearly 7 years, a chilling tapestry woven with threads of suspicion, fear, and a growing sense of dread. I will attempt to recount it as straightforwardly and succinctly as possible, though the true weight of these experiences is difficult to convey in mere words. My home is nestled in a sprawling suburban neighborhood, a pocket of manicured lawns and identical houses surrounded by an expansive expanse of rural countryside. There's nothing but open fields stretching endlessly toward the horizon, and winding country roads, often unpaved and unmarked, that meander through the desolate landscape. It's practically impossible to get anywhere without a car, a stark reality that amplifies the sense of isolation. It's a beautiful place, undoubtedly, with its wide open skies and sweeping vistas, but it's also incredibly secluded. As a result, I often feel confined here, a sense of entrapment that has only intensified during the prolonged isolation of quarantine. The world outside our small bubble feels vast and unknowable, and the lack of easy access to it has fostered a peculiar blend of longing and unease. The first time I remember seeing something truly suspicious, something that pricked at the edges of my young mind, was when I was a mere 9 years old. My little brother, a curious and carefree 7-year-old at the time, and I were taking our dogs for their usual evening stroll, a short walk down towards the front of our street, near the main road. We were casually chatting, our conversation light and innocent, our attention more focused on the playful antics of our dogs than on our surroundings. The air was warm, a gentle breeze rustling through the leaves of the towering trees that lined our street. Suddenly, a voice, deep and unexpected, cut through the quiet. "Hey, come here." A large, imposing white SUV was parked at the very start of our street, its engine idling, a low hum in the otherwise still air. A man, his arm extended from the open window, was motioning for us to come closer, his hand beckoning with a peculiar urgency. I remember distinctly that he was a tall, fair-skinned man, with a shock of curly blonde hair that seemed to catch the last rays of sunlight. My little brother, ever the trusting soul, immediately began to walk towards the car, his young face alight with curiosity. But I, even at that tender age, was a naturally paranoid person. The horror stories, whispered warnings from parents and teachers, about children being lured into vans, never to be seen again, echoed in my mind. A cold, irrational dread seized me. I grabbed my brother's arm, pulling him back, a silent, desperate plea in my grip. "No," I whispered, the single word imbued with a certainty I couldn't quite explain. My instincts, sharp and undeniable, screamed at me to flee. I led us off in the opposite direction, a hurried retreat back towards the perceived safety of our house, all the while keeping a vigilant eye on the man in the white SUV. When he saw that we were clearly leaving, that his subtle beckoning had been rejected, he slowly, deliberately turned his car around. The large vehicle executed a tight, almost aggressive U-turn, its tires crunching on the loose gravel, and then with a low rumble it drove off, disappearing from sight down the main road. Upon arriving home, my heart still thumping erratically, I breathlessly recounted the unsettling encounter to my mom. Her response, however, was dismissive, almost casual. "He was probably just going to ask for directions, honey," she said, waving away my fears with a practiced ease. "There's nothing to worry about." It scared me a little at the time, the nonchalance of her dismissal, but in my innocence, I didn't think much more of it. Not until now, not until years later, when the scattered pieces of memory began to coalesce into a chillingly coherent picture. A year later, during the festive, eerie atmosphere of Halloween 2014, another incident unfolded, a chilling ripple in the quiet current of our suburban existence. A black sedan, its presence a stark contrast to the festive costumes and laughter, was reportedly seen following trick-or-treaters down the street, its dark form a silent, ominous shadow. When a brave parent, their parental instincts overriding their caution, approached the vehicle, it allegedly attempted to run them over before screeching away, a blur of black disappearing into the night. To make matters worse, the license plates, crucial for identification, appeared to have been deliberately removed, a chilling detail that spoke volumes about the occupant's intentions. I didn't witness any of this myself, but the whispers, the anxious conversations among the adults in the neighborhood, transformed the incident into a significant, alarming event. It became a prominent topic of discussion, a source of collective unease, and I, along with every other child on the street, was subjected to yet another stern, fear-inducing lecture about the dangers of talking to strangers. People I remember were particularly sensitive about this kind of thing at the time, their anxieties heightened by the recent tragic murder of Hannah Graham, a case that had dominated local news and cast a long, dark shadow over our community. Fast forward another 4 years. It was summer break 2018, a time of lazy days and long, sun-drenched evenings. Some of our neighbors, a kind, elderly couple, were out of town on a much-anticipated vacation, and they had asked me if I would be willing to pet sit for them while they were away. It seemed like a simple, pleasant responsibility. I had to go by their house 3 times a day to let their dog out. Once in the morning around 8 a.m., once in the afternoon after lunch, and finally once in the evening promptly at 9 p.m. Their house sat a little to the right of our neighborhood, nestled off the main road, its distant location lending it an air of quiet solitude. To get there from my house, I had 2 options. I could either go to the very end of my street and take a right onto the main road, a longer but straightforward route, or I could take a shortcut, cutting directly through the dense woods that bordered our properties and emerging directly into their backyard. Going through the woods was significantly faster, but the brush was incredibly dense, a tangled labyrinth of thorny bushes and low-hanging branches, and the trees were packed so closely together that navigating them felt like traversing a dark, claustrophobic tunnel. So, more often than not, I opted for the easier, if longer, route along the street. One night, completely engrossed in a particularly intense session of Call of Duty with my friends, the hours slipping away like grains of sand, I completely forgot about my pet-sitting duties. The realization hit me like a physical blow. It was past 10 p.m. A surge of worry, cold and sharp, washed over me. The poor dog, I fretted, he might have already peed on the floor inside. Without a moment's hesitation, I rushed out the door, the urgency of the situation overriding my usual caution. It was pitch black outside, a moonless night that swallowed all light. I couldn't see anything beyond the immediate beam of my small, sputtering flashlight and the faint, shimmering glow of distant stars that pierced the inky blackness above. The air, heavy with the scent of damp earth and unseen nocturnal blossoms, felt oppressive, almost suffocating. Luckily, to my immense relief, the dog had managed to hold it in. He greeted me with a flurry of excited barks and a wagging tail, a testament to his impressive bladder control. I let him out as usual, watching him relieve himself with a grateful sigh. After he was done, I brought him back inside, securing the door behind us, and was about to leave again, my mind already drifting back to my game, when something caught my eye through the living room window. A black sedan. It was parked next to the driveway, its dark form a stark, unsettling silhouette against the moonless night. This immediately made me profoundly uncomfortable. I was pretty sure, almost certain, that it hadn't been there when I first arrived at the house. A cold knot of unease began to form in my stomach. There were no other houses nearby, no other potential visitors. And I knew for a fact that the owners weren't returning for another few days, their vacation stretching into the coming week. I debated what I should do for a few agonizing minutes, my mind racing, cycling through possibilities and worst-case scenarios. The silence of the house, punctuated only by the soft breathing of the dog and the distant chirping of crickets, felt heavy, pregnant with unspoken menace. Finally, my instinct for self-preservation winning out over my fear, I decided to go back through the woods, the shortcut I usually avoided. It felt safer, more concealed than walking openly on the main road. I did so, pushing through the dense, thorny brush, the branches scratching at my clothes, and emerged back onto my street without issue, a sigh of relief escaping my lips. To play it safe, I continued to cut through the woods for the remainder of my time pet-sitting, a small, unsettling ritual born of unease. But I never saw the black car again, its mysterious appearance a lingering question mark in the back of my mind. Now, these isolated occurrences, while unsettling, would not, by themselves, be enough to warrant a story of this magnitude. They were mere ripples in the calm surface of my life. But it's what happened recently, in the past few months, that truly terrifies me, the events that have forced me to connect the scattered dots, to question whether these seemingly disparate incidents might actually be terrifyingly, intimately connected. I run for the track team at my school, a dedicated member of the distance squad. Since quarantine had regrettably prevented us from having official practices, I had taken to running every single day, pounding the pavement on the roads around my house, seeking solace and routine in the familiar rhythm of my feet. My street isn't particularly long, a short cul-de-sac affair, so I often ventured off the main road, exploring the various connecting lanes and winding country paths that crisscrossed our secluded neighborhood. For the first few months, everything was perfectly fine. I would jog for an hour or so, losing myself in the ever-changing scenery, appreciating the quiet solitude of the countryside, and exploring the various different country lanes, each one a new discovery. But about a month ago, as I was running back home on the main road, a feeling of being watched began to creep over me. Then I noticed it. A car. It seemed to be following me. I always run on the left side of the road, facing oncoming traffic, a crucial safety precaution. This is so that if a car comes up behind me on a blind curve or in an area with low visibility, I can see it approaching and react, avoiding a potential collision. Coincidentally, a large white SUV, eerily familiar in its size and color, was on the other side of the road, traveling at roughly the same slow speed I was jogging. This was especially odd, particularly unsettling because there aren't many cars on that road. It's a quiet, seldom used stretch, and you can easily go much faster than on a busy, congested one. The SUV's pace was deliberately, unnervingly slow. Unsure of its intentions, a cold prickle of unease beginning to spread through me, I instinctively turned down a small side street, a dead end with a cul-de-sac at its furthest point. It didn't follow. The SUV continued slowly down the main road, disappearing from my sight. A fleeting sense of relief washed over me. Perhaps it was just a coincidence, an overactive imagination fueled by the solitude of my run. I ran down to the circle at the end of the cul-de-sac, took a quick breather, and then made my way back home, the unsettling encounter relegated to a fleeting, odd moment. However, the very next day it happened again. As I started my run, I saw the same white SUV. This time, it was sitting idly at the start of a long, secluded driveway, its engine off, its windows tinted, a silent, menacing sentinel. As soon as I passed it, it pulled out, its engine rumbling to life and began to follow me. Like the day before, it maintained a consistent, unnerving distance, mirroring my pace, a silent, predatory shadow. It followed me for about a mile, a seemingly endless stretch of road, before I again turned down the same small side street. And just as before, it promptly drove off, leaving me alone in the quiet cul-de-sac. This unnerving pattern continued, day after day, for a relentless 10-day period. Every single day without fail it followed me. At first, I tried to rationalize it, to find a logical explanation for its persistent presence. Perhaps, I thought, it belonged to someone who had a scheduled route, a daily commute that just happened to coincide perfectly with my runs. To test this theory, to try and break the disturbing pattern, I decided to run an hour later than I usually did. The first day I tried this, it wasn't there. A surge of relief, potent and sweet, washed over me. My theory, I believed, had been correct. But the very next day, my relief curdled into a cold, hard knot of dread. I was deeply disturbed to see that it was once again there, a silent, watchful presence, following right behind me. This definitely unnerved me, the undeniable proof of a deliberate, persistent surveillance. But I was hesitant to tell my parents, fearful that they would forbid me from running altogether, stripping away a precious freedom, a vital outlet. Furthermore, it hadn't attempted to do anything yet. It had only followed, its actions unsettling but not overtly threatening. So, I decided, perhaps naively, that I could put up with it as long as I was careful and watched it closely, always aware of its presence, always ready to react. On the 11th day of being followed, the air heavy with an unspoken tension, I turned down the familiar side street. And there, sitting at the very end of the cul-de-sac, was a black sedan. At first I thought nothing of it. There were a few houses on the street and it likely belonged to somebody who lived there, a casual visitor, a family member. But as I began to get closer, a strange, unsettling detail caught my eye. Something odd, barely visible, protruded from underneath the car. It was the silhouette of a person, huddled on the far side, barely fitting beneath the vehicle, clearly trying to avoid being seen. A chill, sudden and electric shot through me. I immediately got chills, every nerve ending screaming in alarm, and without a second thought, I turned and ran off in the opposite direction, my gaze locked over my shoulder, desperate to make sure they stayed put, that the hidden figure didn't emerge. To make matters worse, as I sprinted back towards the main road, I saw that the white SUV, which usually drove away, was now sitting stationary at the top of the street, blocking my escape route, effectively penning me in. Panic, cold and sharp, began to claw at my throat. I was trapped. In that moment of intense, blinding fear, I made a desperate calculation. I preferred the evil I knew to the unknown terror lurking beneath the black sedan. So, I picked up my pace, pushing my already screaming legs, and tried to sprint by the white SUV, hoping to outrun whatever waited for me there. When I was within a few feet of it, the passenger door suddenly flew open, and a man jumped out, launching himself into a sprint directly after me. I easily outpaced him, my months of dedicated training paying off in that crucial, terrifying moment. Thank God for my endurance, for the countless miles I had logged. When it became undeniably clear that he couldn't catch me, that my speed was a formidable barrier, he yelled after me, his voice rough and guttural, "Come back. I just want to talk." My response was immediate, instinctive, and laced with pure, unadulterated defiance. 2 fingers raised defiantly in the air, if you catch my drift. I sprinted the remaining mile back to my house, a frantic blur of motion, my lungs burning, my legs screaming, but powered by a surge of pure, unadulterated terror. I finally broke down when I burst through my front door, the raw, unfiltered terror of the experience overwhelming me. I told my mom everything, the whole unbelievable, horrifying story. She immediately got me on the phone with the police, her face pale with shock and concern. Sadly though, since I hadn't managed to get a license plate number for either vehicle, there wasn't much they could do. They promised that they would look into it, a hollow reassurance that offered little comfort. As far as I can tell, nothing has been done. These terrifying experiences have haunted me for the past couple of weeks, their chilling echoes reverberating through my thoughts. With all my spare time, especially during quarantine, I've had ample opportunity to contemplate the situation, to connect the scattered dots, to piece together the fragments of memory and suspicion. It's now crystal clear to me, these men have been trying for multiple years to kidnap a child from our street. There are quite a lot of children in my neighborhood, their presence a constant, vibrant hum of youthful energy, which explains why they frequent it so often, why they meticulously stalk its quiet roads. It worries me deeply that somebody less cautious, less instinctively paranoid than myself, might find themselves in a similar situation, might fall prey to these predators. I still have nightmares about the man who chased me down the street, his face a distorted mask of rage, his silent pursuit a chilling echo in the dark corners of my sleep. He was very tall, with those distinct curly blonde locks, the same man who, I am now certain, tried to abduct me when I was a mere 9 years old. The realization is a cold, inescapable dread, a horrifying certainty that binds these disparate events into a single terrifying narrative.